Hello students, this session we'll be doing physicochemical aspects of muscle contraction in the muscle physiology. This is Dr. Hemlata from Maharani Science College for Women, Bangalore. So the contraction of the muscle brings about movement, in turn locomotion. If you look at the course of evolution, it is this mobility which has made the animals much more successful as they have the capacity to move from one place to another. And this movement is because of the very well developed muscular system, and the muscles contract, bringing about movement. When the muscle is contracting, it needs energy as the fuel. The primary source of energy comes from ATP. ATP provides energy for the activity which is a low intense activity, routine activity or resting condition, like the breathing happening when you are at rest. At that time ATP will provide the energy. Then you have phosphocreatine, lipids, glucose, glycogen. We will see how each one of them will come in the way to provide the energy during the muscle contraction. So adenosine triphosphate, ATP, is the primary source of energy. The body doesn't store energy. When you start doing some physical activity like walking or running, then whatever ATP is available, that will be enough only for 3 seconds. Then other biochemical pathways will start releasing the energy for the muscular movement or the contraction of the muscle. The next one which gives energy is the creatine phosphate. Creatine phosphate will supply energy which will be enough for about 8 to 10 seconds. So you are sitting, then you will start moving. You will start running, let us say. For the first 3 seconds, the ATP which is present as such will give the energy. For the next 8 to 10 seconds, creatine phosphate is giving the energy. Then we will see what happens. So in this, you will see there are 3 pictures. The first one showing the muscle in a resting state. So when the muscle is resting, what the ATP is there in the body, so it gives releases a phosphate which will be picked up by the creatine, and it results in the formation of creatine phosphate and ADP. And this creatine phosphate is a store of energy. So some energy is in the form of ATP. Some energy from ATP will be transferred to creatine and stored in the form of creatine phosphate. So in a resting state, there is energy available as ATP to an extent, and some energy available in the form of creatine phosphate. When the muscle becomes active, then first ATP will hydrolyze, it gives energy. Then creatine phosphate will hydrolyze in the presence of the enzyme creatine kinase, and creatine will be released back and ATP will be produced, and this ATP will be used up by the muscle for the energy. This is the first step. Next, glucose which is there in the blood will provide energy. When glucose is broken down in glycolysis, it results in the formation of ATP. And when that is not enough, then the glycogen which is present in the muscle will get converted to glucose, and this glucose in glycolysis is converted to ATP and pyruvate, and this pyruvate is broken down. The pyruvate, there are 2 pathways. If enough oxygen is there, then it enters into aerobic respiration. If the oxygen is not enough, then it gets converted to lactic acid. So when there is a strenuous activity which you are not used to, then enough oxygen is not available for the working muscle. Whatever oxygen, it will take some time for the body to realize that the oxygen requirement is increased. So till then, anaerobic respiration will support, and that will be releasing the energy. In the absence of the oxygen in the working muscle, anaerobic respiration takes place where pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid, and that will start releasing the energy. But if you look at the aerobic respiration, the amount of ATP produced is much more in aerobic respiration compared to the anaerobic respiration. Then you have the blood glucose, then the pyruvic acid, and also fatty acids. When you exercise, fats also get broken down. All of them will be converted to the energy which will be used up by the cell in the cellular respiration. It enters the mitochondria. Then it will be converted to ATP. ATP will fuel the muscular contraction, and in addition, heat, carbon dioxide and water also will be generated. So what happens? First, the immediate energy will come from the ATP, which is stored in the resting muscle, which will sustain for a few seconds. Then ATP will be generated by creatine phosphate somewhere between 8 to 15 seconds. Then glucose molecule will start breaking down. It produces 2 ATP and 2 pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid can enter aerobic respiration if there is oxygen. If there is no oxygen, it gets converted to lactic acid. So whenever the muscle is overworking and the body is not giving enough oxygen, it is not getting enough oxygen, then it enters anaerobic respiration, and this lactic acid will not produce enough ATP, and as a result the muscle will start feeling tired. Muscle fatigue will happen. This is when you are doing some strenuous exercise which the body is not used to. Whereas if you are doing some sustained activity, let us say you are just walking and you are used to that. People who are very active, they condition their entire system in such a way that there is no problem in the production of the ATP. So for this sustained activity, aerobic respiration will support, like walking, cycling, swimming, where it is conditioned, then aerobic respiration will support, where glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen and lot of ATP is produced. 95% of the ATP required by the body when resting or when the body is doing moderate activity will come from aerobic respiration, where the glucose is broken down, oxidative phosphorylation will happen inside the mitochondria, and energy is generated which is used for the activity. Glycogen is the store of energy in the muscle. Extra glucose is converted to glycogen. It will be stored either in the muscle or in the liver. In the muscle glycogen will liberate energy which will last for about 90 seconds. For this, oxygen is not needed. The moment you start strenuous activity, it will take some time for your respiratory pathway. We did this in our respiration chapter, where the chemoreceptors will sense the amount of carbon dioxide produced, amount of hydrogen ion produced, that will be taken to the brain. The brain will in turn send the message to the heart and to the respiratory system to increase the rate of respiration, so that when the ventilatory rate, that is exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen happens, then more oxygen is available, and that oxygen will be taken to the working muscle. For that, some time is needed. So till then, anaerobic respiration will happen, and a byproduct will be the lactic acid. The lactic acid is the one which causes pain in the muscle. When you do an unusual activity, you get pain in the muscle. That is because of the accumulation of the lactic acid, which causes the muscle soreness. And that's the reason why today if you do activity, tomorrow you should not rest. You have to do activity so that you take in more oxygen to resolve the accumulation of the lactic acid. In the aerobic respiration, so when you start doing some exercise, within 2 minutes, the body will start supplying it will start supplying the oxygen to the muscle. It will take about 2 minutes for the ventilatory rate to get adjusted and for the respiratory system to take in more oxygen, and to supply that to the muscle it will take about 2 minutes, and after that aerobic respiration will start. And when oxygen is present, aerobic respiration will generate ATP by breaking down glucose, which is sufficient to sustain the activity. So in between, anaerobic respiration will support the activity, and then lactic acid will cause muscle soreness. So what are the sources for aerobic respiration? The muscle cell will be supplied with glucose. That will be the first one to release the energy. When that is over, it will start collecting the glucose from the intestine if it is available. It enters into the blood, and the blood will supply that glucose to the working muscle. If that also is not enough, then the glycogen which is present in the liver breaks down and releases glucose, which is brought to the muscle. The fat reserves which are present in the muscle will start breaking down. Suppose if somebody is starving, let us say for one whole day, if one person had not eaten, the next day morning he will start exercising. Then if no source of carbohydrate is available, no glucose source is available, protein itself, just not for one day, it takes some days for the body protein to break. If nothing is available, then the body protein itself will break to release the energy. Aerobic respiration is the slowest of all the three systems, but the supply of the ATP will be continuous, which will sustain the activity for several hours. There is what is called as Cori cycle, which was described by Carl Ferdinand Cori and Gerty Teresa Radnitz. It is called as Cori cycle or glucose lactate cycle. Here, there is a cooperation between the working skeletal muscle and the liver when the oxygen is less. When the oxygen is less, there is a coordination between the working muscle and the liver. What is that? The conversion of glucose to lactic acid, that is by anaerobic method. Anaerobic glycolysis will happen in the skeletal muscle. Now this lactic acid will diffuse from the muscle cell, enters into the bloodstream, which is taken to the liver. In the liver, the lactate will be converted to glucose by hepatic gluconeogenesis. And this glucose in turn will leave the hepatocytes and enter into the bloodstream, and it will be taken back to the skeletal muscle. So, when there is no oxygen, skeletal muscle is producing lactic acid, which is transported to the liver by the blood. There, it is converted to glucose by hepatic gluconeogenesis, which will come back to the skeletal muscle. This is called as Cori cycle. This is the coordination between the working muscle and the liver under low oxygen conditions. Now, what are the physical changes? So, till now we looked at the chemical aspect of the muscle contraction. That is, mainly we looked at the energy source, how the energy is obtained for the purpose of contraction from different sources. Now we will look at some of the physical changes that will happen during muscle contraction. When the muscle is contracting, the metabolic activity is more and the temperature raises and heat will be produced. That's why when you are exercising, your body temperature will go up, it will start sweating. In order to dissipate the heat, body will start sweating. So that is because of the heat generation during the contraction of the muscle. This is one of the change what you observe. There is electricity generation. That is, when the physical activity is happening, the information is coming from the brain. The brain is sending the information in the form of nerve impulse, that is action potential, that is the electrical energy. That information from the brain comes to the muscle. It enters into the muscle. Once it enters into the muscle, the electrical energy will be converted to mechanical energy, and this mechanical energy will generate the force and that force will be used up for the movement of the muscle. So this is the change where electrical energy will be converted to chemical and to mechanical, generating the force required for muscle contraction and movement. There are also volume changes which will happen in the muscle. The muscle can contract, the length of the muscle can reduce or it can get stretched depending upon the type of the activity you are doing. Suppose you are lifting something very heavy, then the muscles will contract. Suppose if you are pushing something very heavy, then the muscles will stretch. So there are different types of contractions happening, bringing about either pulling or stretching, and when this happens, the muscle will either reduce or it will get expanded. That is the change in the volume of the muscle. There are also changes noted in the optical properties of the muscle fibers, and sound is produced during actinomyosin contraction. When the muscle is contracting, it is the actin and myosin which brings about the contraction. So when that happens, sound will be generated because of the contraction of actin and myosin. So these are some physical changes noted during muscle contraction. So when a skeletal muscle contraction happens, how it happens? The muscle will be stimulated by a motor nerve. That is, the nerve which is bringing the information from the brain to the muscle is a motor nerve. And this motor nerve will land on the muscle fiber and it transmits the action potential into the muscle, and that information will be taken inside the muscle fiber where the myofilaments are located. Then the actin and myosin will slide one over the other. When the actin and myosin will slide one over the other, the muscle fiber will become short. When the muscle fiber shortens, it brings about contraction of the skeletal muscle and the movement of the skeletal muscle. So when the skeletal muscle contraction is happening, chemical energy or heat energy gets converted into mechanical energy, and it brings about movement, for which the nerve impulse from the brain should come to the muscle. Now, the junction between the nerve and the muscle is called as a neuromuscular junction. All of you have studied the synapse. Synapse is a connection between one nerve and the other. So the information, when it comes through from the brain through the nerves, the information will be passed on from one nerve to other, then one nerve to another. Finally, it reaches the destination, that is the skeletal muscle. And in the skeletal muscle, the junction between the nerve and the muscle is called as neuromuscular junction. This neuromuscular junction will have a small space between the nerve and the muscle, which you call it as the synapse. So this synapse is between the motor neuron and the skeletal muscle. You call it as neuromuscular junction. And a process called as excitation contraction coupling will happen. This is a physiological response in which an electrical stimulus is converted to a mechanical response. That is, action potential generated in the brain is brought to the muscle. When it reaches the muscle, the first thing which receives the electrical stimulus is the membrane of the muscle, sarcolemma. From the sarcolemma, the information passes down the T-tubule, that is the infolding of the sarcolemma. Information passes through the T-tubule and it enters into the T-tubule, and from there the action potential will bring about lot of changes, and that we will be studying, and we will look at how the muscle contraction will happen later. So if you look at this picture, you will see that there is the nerve ending. So the green, what you're seeing, the green colored picture is the nerve. It's a motor nerve. So if you remember the nerve picture, you have the axon, then you have the cell body, dendrites. So the dendrites is the region where the action potential, close to the cell body, the action potential will be elicited, or the dendrites will receive the action potential and it will be conducted along the axon. Then it will pass through the axon, that is the transmission, synaptic transmission along the axon, which you have already studied in your nervous system chapter. Once it reaches the axon terminal, then the axon terminal will have a slightly swollen structure called as end bulb. So this is the end bulb of the axon terminal of a motor neuron. If you look at the inner aspect of the end bulb, you will see that it contains mitochondria and also membrane bound vesicles called as synaptic vesicles. These synaptic vesicles will contain the neurotransmitters. The most common neurotransmitter is the acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is present inside these synaptic vesicles. So when the action potential will reach the axon terminal, then it brings about some changes in the axon terminal. What are those changes? Calcium ions will enter into the synaptic, it enters into the axon terminal, that is the end bulb. Calcium ions will enter into that. When the calcium ions enter, it brings about changes. The synaptic vesicles will fuse to the membrane of the axon terminal. Now this is called as the presynaptic membrane. So this presynaptic membrane, which is near the synaptic cleft is the gap between the axon terminal and the muscle membrane. The space between the nerve end and the muscle membrane is the synaptic cleft. So the synaptic vesicle will fuse to the wall of the axon terminal and it opens and releases the neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. So the acetylcholine will be released into the synaptic cleft by a process called as exocytosis. By exocytosis, the the acetylcholine will be released. Once the acetylcholine is released into the synaptic cleft, then it binds to the receptors which are present on the membrane of the muscle. Now the membrane of the muscle present near the synaptic cleft is called as postsynaptic membrane. So here the membrane of the muscle, that is the sarcolemma, that is the postsynaptic membrane, is folded at the junction and it will have receptors. The neurotransmitter acetylcholine will bind to the receptors present on the postsynaptic membrane and there it will elicit action potential. Eliciting action potential is reversal of the charges. When the action potential is elicited, it will cause the adjacent location of the membrane to elicit another action potential. Thus, a wave of action potential will be generated and that will pass through the T-tubule. T-tubule is the invagination of the muscle membrane, that is the sarcolemma. So, action potential enters through the T-tubule and then it enters into the muscle fiber. This is what is happening at the neuromuscular junction. when the action potential reaches the end bulb, the presynaptic membrane, calcium ions will enter, synaptic vesicles will fuse with the presynaptic membrane, acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter, will be released into the synaptic cleft. That will bind to the postsynaptic membrane. The receptors are present on the postsynaptic membrane. The neurotransmitters will bind to the receptors. So from there, the action potential will be initiated on the muscle membrane. That will generate action potential in the adjacent part of the membrane, creating a wave of action potential which ultimately enters into the T-tubule and it enters into the muscle fiber. So in this picture, it is showing elaborately. Here you can see the muscle membrane is there. At one point, you have the neuromuscular junction. When the nerve reaches the muscle fiber, it will branch and it will form neuromuscular junction in many places. Once it reaches the action potential reaches the muscle membrane, what it does, calcium ions enters into the terminal button. It's also called as terminal button. Then calcium ions will enter into the terminal button. Then the neurotransmitter will be released, which will be picked up by the receptors present on the postsynaptic membrane, which will generate action potential along the adjacent membrane, which passes into the T-tubules. Once it passes into the T-tubules, very close to the T-tubules are the terminal cisternae of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, that is the triad. In the triad, in the center there is T-tubule. On either side there are calcium ions. There are the enlargement of the sarcoplasmic reticulum forming the terminal cisternae. So the two terminal cisternae with one T-tubule is called as a triad, and sarcoplasmic reticulum is the storehouse of calcium ions. So once the nerve impulse passes through the T-tubules, it will activate the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and this sarcoplasmic reticulum in turn will start releasing calcium ions. Once the calcium ions are released, these calcium ions will be picked up by the muscle. In the muscle there are the myofilaments, which we have already studied. We have studied about the actin. In the actin, there are two regulatory proteins, tropomyosin and troponin. In troponin, there are three subunits, troponin I, troponin C, and I for actin, C for calcium, and there is another one, T for tropomyosin. So these calcium will bind to the troponin C unit. Once it binds to the troponin C unit, then sliding mechanism will happen. So this we will do it in the next chapter, that is the sliding mechanism of the muscle proteins. So here what we learned was the excitation coupling contraction. It starts with the nerve impulse. Then the nerve impulse is transmitted at the neuromuscular junction. It enters the muscle, then it enters first it will initiate action potential on the membrane, then it enters the T-tubule, then near the triad it will activate the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which in turn releases calcium ions, and these calcium ions in turn will bind to the troponin C unit, and this will bring about the sliding filament mechanism, which we will do in the next chapter. So what is that? You will see when the action potential reaches the muscle, it brings about depolarization of the sarcolemma. When depolarization of the sarcolemma, this is just a revision for you. So generally what will happen in a resting state, you will see that sodium ions are present more on the outer side of the nerve membrane or the muscle membrane, and potassium ions will be more on the inner side of the membrane. So when the action potential reaches the membrane, it brings about depolarization, that is the reversal of the charges. What happens during that? Sodium ions will enter inside, potassium ions will move out by the sodium potassium ATPase pump. This brings about depolarization of the sarcolemma, and it is the first step in the contraction of the muscle. So, depolarization of the sarcolemma brought about by influx of sodium ions and efflux of potassium ions is the first step in the contraction process. Stimulation of the skeletal muscle. So, this muscle is stimulated now. So, if it is stimulated in one point, it results in a wave of action potential continuously stimulating the entire muscle. Then the information will be taken along the T-tubule. Then it reaches the triad where sarcoplasmic reticulum will be activated and it releases calcium ions from the terminal cisternae. And this calcium ions will initiate the contraction process when it binds to troponin. So, we have looked into the first part of the physical aspect and chemical aspect of contraction in this. In the second part, I will be giving little information about the different types of contractions which are responsible for muscle movement in this chapter. So, in physico-chemical aspect of contraction, I have made two videos. In part 1, we studied about the energy aspect of the contraction and the excitation coupling theory of the contraction. In part 2, you will be doing the different types of contraction. So, with this, I am completing the first part of physico-chemical aspect of contraction. Thank you, students. Hello, students. In this session, we are going to do part 2 of physico-chemical aspects of muscle contraction. In the first video, we saw how the muscle contraction for which energy is required is supplemented by different sources, and also what are some of the changes what you see in the physical aspects of the muscle. In continuation of that, we have some more aspects to be dealt with, which we will be doing in this session. This is Dr. Hemlata from Maharani Science College for Women, Bangalore. So, if you look at the muscle, in the course of evolution, vertebrates have developed very well developed muscular system, and the muscles will contract, which brings about movement. Movement can be external or what is happening inside, like which is aiding the process of digestion or respiration or moving from one place to another, which is the basic property of life. So basically, the muscle contraction leads to various functions such as locomotion or even to maintain a posture. Like if you are sitting, you have to sit straight. When you are walking, you should keep your back straight. All that is the support given by the muscular system, which maintains the posture. It also maintains the shape of the body. And if you look at internally, aids digestion, circulation, reproduction, excretion, etc. The property of the muscle tissue is excitability. That is, when it receives an action potential from a nerve, an action potential will be elicited, which can be transmitted from one part to another part. That is, from where the stimuli is received, it is taken to the brain. From the brain, the message will go to the target organ. So that is conductivity. It can get excited and conduct. That is the transmission of the impulse. Then it can contract. And once it contracts, it can either become shortened or it can expand. This is extensibility, and it is highly elastic in nature. It is this elasticity which is giving the property of extensibility. So for all this, actin and myosin cross-bridge cycling should happen. That is, the actin filament should be pulled over the myosin filament in a repeated pattern called as cross-bridge cycling, and this will bring about the contraction of the muscle. This in turn will generate tension, and this tension is the one which is bringing about the activity of the muscle. So when the tension is created, the muscle can either lengthen or shorten, or it can remain the same depending upon the activity what you are performing. So this shortening or generation of the tension in a muscle fiber is the factor responsible for the muscle movement, and you will see that how the muscle contraction can change the length of the muscle. So the force generated by the contraction of the muscle is called as muscle tension. It is this muscle tension required for the action of the muscle. So whenever there is an action, means sometimes the contraction is because of a load. So depending upon the type of contraction, there are different types: isotonic contraction and isometric contraction. So if you look at the picture here, in the first one, the muscle is contracting and it becomes shortened. It brings about the movement. Here, the movement is when a person is lifting weight. Especially if you look at the people in gym training, they are working out their muscles with the help of weights. So when they lift a weight, the muscle will contract, and this is bringing about the flexing of the elbow, and as a result, the hand moves towards your body carrying the weight. So this is one type of movement. In the next one, you will see the muscle will go down, and here there is no movement. When you are catching something, when you have to hold something, then only tension is helping in gripping the hold but not moving the object. So with this, we will look at the various types of contractions what you come across in the muscle fiber. So there are two basic types of muscle contraction: isometric and isotonic. In isometric, force is generated by the muscle, but there is no change in the length. Like what we see in the second picture in the previous slide, no movement but only force is generated. Such a type of contraction where force is generated but there is no change in the length of the muscle is called as isometric contraction. So whenever you are doing some work with an immovable object, like if you are pushing against the wall, then force is generated but there will be no change in the length of the muscle. Generally, isometric contraction is seen in postural activity, that is to maintain the posture. Now, suppose if you are sitting, if you have to raise your leg, then you have to raise it and hold it like that. That holding is brought about by isometric contraction. So what you have to remember is, in isometric contraction, force is generated but no change in the length of the muscle. The second one is called as isotonic. Here, the tension will remain constant. That is, the force generated by the muscle will remain constant, but the length of the muscle will change. So isotonic means constant tension, but the length will change. In this, there are two types. First one is concentric. During the muscle contraction, if the muscle shortens and also produce force, then it is called as concentric contraction. If during the muscle contraction, then there is production of force also and there is increase in the length also, then it is called as eccentric contraction. So isotonic contraction means the tension will be constant, but there will be either change, there will be change in the length of the muscle. Either it can reduce or it can increase. It is concentric and eccentric contraction. In concentric, there is shortening of the muscle. When you are lifting a heavy weight, then your arm will bend. When it bends, the upper arm, there are muscles called as biceps. It is the biceps which will mainly aid in lifting the weight. And when you lift it and bring it towards the shoulder, then there is shortening of the bicep muscle, and this is example for concentric contraction. Then what happens? You have to put the weight back. So during that time, what you will do is, the elongation of the muscle will happen. The muscle which is contracted will have to relax and elongate. Here also force is generated. and it brings about the movement of the hand back to its normal position. In this, there can be two types of contraction. One is voluntary eccentric, another one is involuntary eccentric. When you say voluntary eccentric, if you take the previous example, you have lifted the weight, then you will bringing it down, you are bringing it back to its normal position, and that can be controlled. Then it is called as voluntary eccentric contraction. But sometimes, you know, you would have lifted the weight, but when you're trying to bring it back, you will note that your hand cannot support the weight because the weight is too much. Then even if you want to hold it, your muscle cannot hold it. It will gradually come down. You cannot hold it there. It will come down by itself and it will come back to the normal position. This is involuntary eccentric contraction. Now here we are looking at the concentric and eccentric. So you can understand here better what is happening in concentric: shortening of the muscle. You are bringing the weight, here the biceps is involved. You are bringing the weight towards your shoulder. There is movement, that is the elbow is getting bent and here the weight is coming towards your shoulder and the muscle is contracting. What happens in eccentric? Once the contraction has happened, then the weight has to go back to its normal position. The muscle will expand and it will go back to its normal place. So there is resistance also and there is force also. The resistance is by the weight, the force is generated by the muscle. So against the resistance, you are pushing the weight down back to its normal position, bringing about eccentric contraction. It can be voluntary or involuntary. If you can control the bringing back of the weight, then it is voluntary. If you cannot control, if by itself the muscle will relax, then it is called as involuntary. So this is how the muscle changes in the shape when it is contracting. So this is the case where isotonic concentric contraction is happening. In isotonic, there is change in the length of the muscle. In concentric, there is reduction of the length of the muscle. So like what we saw in the previous example, when you are lifting the weight and it is coming towards your shoulder, the muscle will contract. So if you look at the graph, initially there is resistance, the weight is there, but then your muscle will generate the tension or the force and you will start bringing the weight. Then it goes up, that is the peak. Then you will hold there, that is the flat. Then you will bring it back, that is the relaxing of the muscle. So when it is relaxing, then the muscle is getting extended. When it is contracting, the muscle will get shortened and the weight is coming towards the body. Now, if you look at isometric contractions, in isometric contraction, there is generation of the force, but there is no change in the length of the muscle. Generally, it is seen whenever you have to hold something for a long time, for gripping or to maintain the posture. See, if you have to sit straight, you know, you have to keep your back straight and you have to keep your head straight. That is because of the posture which is brought about by the muscle. So this type of postural support and for gripping is brought about by isometric contraction. It can be either yielding or overcoming. Yielding means there is contraction, there is some opposition, there is resistance. Because of the resistance, there is opposition. So whenever you are holding a heavy weight, you have to hold it and stand there. You are neither raising it nor lowering it. You are holding it and simply standing there. Then it is called as yielding type of isometric contraction, which is basically for gripping the weight. The second type is overcoming isometric contraction. Here, let us say there is an immovable object like a wall. When you are doing some push-ups or when you are doing some exercise, you are pushing against the wall. So here, what happens? You are just generating the force, but there is no change in the length of the muscle. In both the cases, there is no change in the length of the muscle. That is, in the yielding as well as the overcoming, no change in the length of the muscle, but the force is generated. This is called isometric contraction. Gripping is yielding and just pushing against an immovable object is overcoming type of isometric contraction. Now, basically, if you look at the isometric contraction, there, whenever you are doing anaerobic exercise, That is, you are doing the exercise which is very strenuous. The oxygen supply to the muscle is not enough. Then the muscle enters anaerobic respiration. That time isometric exercise will happen. That is one of the case where isometric exercise can happen. Isotonic is generally supported by aerobic respiration. So whenever you are doing aerobic exercises, most of the time it is the isotonic type of contraction what happens in the muscle. So here you can see isometric contraction. So isometric means there is generation of force but no change in the length. So you have put your hand out, you are holding something. So that holding requires the force, but there is no change in the length of the muscle. So no movement is produced in isometric, but it is required. For example, you have to stand in some place for a long time. That standing is because of isometric contraction. Sitting or lifting your leg and holding the leg in place. Holding the leg in place is an example for isometric contraction. So this is how the muscle contracts during isometric contraction. You will see there is no change in the length of the muscle. Only the force is generated against the resistance. So whenever you start, that is the beginning of the graph. Then the force is generated. The graph raises up. Then it reaches the peak. Then it holds there for some time and then relaxes. So this is how the isometric contraction will happen. So here you can see the shape change in the muscle during different types of contraction. When it is concentric contraction, means the muscle is shortening. Look at the first picture. In that left side, the muscle is in the normal state. Right side, the muscle is in the contracted state. And what is it bringing about? It is bringing about the movement of the hand towards your body. In the second picture, it is the picture of eccentric contraction. Here, the muscle is stretching out, and what is the movement brought about here? In the left side picture, the muscle when it is holding, in the right side it is getting extended. It is bringing about the movement of the hand from your body to back to its normal position. That is the movement brought about. In the third one, it is isometric contraction. Here in the first one, the hand is there without any weight. In the second one, you are holding the weight. So because of holding the weight, your hand gets pushed a little, but there will be no change in the length of the muscle. So with this, we will look at what do you mean by muscle tension. So whenever a muscle will contract, means what? The myosin will have cross bridges which will bind with the actin. Cross bridging will happen. Then actin will be pulled over by the myosin, resulting in contraction of the muscle. So whenever a muscle gets pulled, then it results in the production of force. This is called as muscle tension. How much of force is created by the muscle depends upon what type of activity you are doing. Whether you are doing something very light or whether you are doing something very heavy. Like you are holding a pencil, same muscle is involved. You are holding a feather, same muscle is involved. You are holding some 5 kg, 10 kg weight, then also the same muscle involved. How much of tension you create in the muscle depends upon the resistance offered by the activity what you are doing. So in a muscle fiber, the tension produced will be equal to the cross-sectional area of the muscle fiber and also the frequency of the neural stimulation. Means if the activity is more, the frequency of neural stimulation will be more. If the frequency of neural stimulation is more, then the amount of muscles involved in contraction will be more. If that is more, force generated will be more. So the number of cross bridges formed will be equal to the amount of tension produced by the muscle. For example, you have to pick up something, then the brain is sending the messages to the muscle. If you are picking up a very heavy object, let us say you have to carry a bag of 5 kgs or 10 kgs, then the muscle, the brain will tell maximum number of myofibers to participate in creating the force. And if you have to lift a very small weight, very few signals will pass on to the muscle and only that much of force will be generated. And if you look at invertebrates, when a myofiber is stimulated, it is complete. It's not half and half. Stimulation means complete muscle will contract. So it is full response of the muscle to the stimulation. So here you can see the muscle fiber. So from the muscle fiber, you will see the action potential which is coming from the central nervous system. Then the axon will come and land over the muscle fiber. Then there is the neuromuscular junction. There is the motor end plate. That is the axon terminal end plate resting on the muscle membrane sarcolemma. There the neuromuscular junction will be formed. Then there is presynaptic potential, and that is the end plate potential, and postsynaptic membrane is there. Then the neurotransmitters will be released into the synaptic cleft. All this you will be learning in the you have learnt in the first part of the physicochemical aspect of muscle contraction. You have learnt there. So just to recap, then the muscle fiber in turn will generate the action potential which will spread across the muscle fiber. It enters into the muscle fiber. Once it enters into the muscle fiber, it releases calcium ions. These calcium ions will bind to troponin C, and troponin C will bring about change in the tropomyosin, exposing the binding of actin and myosin. When this happens, muscles will contract. So there is potential differences across the membrane. There will be resting membrane potential minus 70 millivolts. When action potential is generated, there is reversal of charges. Once the reversal of charges takes place, action potential is elicited and it is transmitted from one part of the nerve to the other, and it reaches the end plate of the axon fiber. Then that will impinge on the muscle fiber and muscle will contract. So there is action potential on the nerve which is transmitted to the membrane of the muscle, that is the sarcolemma. Then action potential is generated in the membrane, and this brings about the contraction of the muscle. So when a muscle contracts, if you look at each contraction, you can see there are three phases. The first phase is the latent period. That is the period during which the muscle has received the stimuli and it is prepared for contraction. Calcium ions are released and tropomyosin will bind. Once it binds, contraction will start. That becomes the second phase, contraction phase. Contraction will happen. Once the contraction is completed, muscle fiber will relax. That is the third phase, called as relaxation phase. This is how contraction will be generated in the muscle fiber. So the force generation in the muscle, how much of force is generated, will depend upon the type of the motor units which are responsible to bring about the generation of force. If there are more number of muscle fibers or motor units involved, then the force generated will be greater. And also there are different types of muscle fibers like fast muscle fibers and slow muscle fibers. If the muscle fibers are fast muscle fibers, then those motor units will generate greater force. So there will be one muscle fiber. So that will be in resting state. That is the initial muscle length. When it receives a stimuli, it will contract and results in the generation of the force. So this generation of the force will depend upon the frequency of the stimulation. Depending upon the frequency of the stimulation, you see different types of contraction. In the different types of contraction, this is based on the frequency of the stimulation. There are different types. You have something called a simple twitch, then you have summation and tetanus. We will see what it means. Whenever a muscle responds for an action potential, it is either the entire muscle response or no response at all. It is called as all or none response. If it is responding, means complete muscle fiber is contracting. So for the muscle contraction to happen, the action potential should have one basic level of stimulus called as threshold stimulus. If the stimulus is less than that, it cannot elicit action potential. But if the stimulus is having threshold stimulus, then it will bring about action potential resulting in full muscle contraction. When a muscle contracts, if there is one single contraction, brought about by one motor unit or some very few motor units. Very few motor units is bringing about one single contraction, then it is called as a twitch. So there is the latent period, that is the time between the stimulus and the actual muscle contraction. Then there is refractory period, that is immediately after contraction. The muscle will take some time for all the reversal of potential to happen, and so that it can receive the next action potential. So that period is called as refractory period, and during refractory period it will not respond. Once the reversal of charges happens, then it will respond. So now we will see the different aspects of the twitch. If you have to look at the muscle contraction, I told you the frequency of the stimulation is bringing about different types of contraction. If there is one single action potential coming from a motor neuron producing one single contraction, it is called as a twitch. You must have observed, sometimes your eyelid will simply twitch. It will contract and relax, or some part of your face there may be a twitch, or in the arms or legs there may be a twitch. For some time the muscle will contract and relax. This is called as a twitch. Generally it happens in the face or the arms or the legs. It takes few milliseconds to some 100 milliseconds, that's all. It will not extend beyond that. This is called as a muscle twitch. Here there is latent period, that is when the action potential is propagated from the nervous system, it reaches the sarcolemma and it enters the T-tubule and calcium ions are released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Then it brings about excitation, coupling, contraction, but the contraction has not yet started. Till here it is called as latent period. Then the calcium ions in the sarcoplasm will be released. It will bind to troponin. It will shift the tropomyosin. Actin-myosin binding sites will be exposed and they will bind, and shortening of the muscle fiber will happen. This is called as the contraction phase. Once the shortening has happened, calcium ions will go back from the sarcoplasm into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Cross-bridge cycling will stop and the muscle will stop contracting, and this is the relaxation phase. So these are the three phases you see in all the contraction, and if it is only one single contraction, you call it as a muscle twitch. So this is the graph showing the muscle twitch. This is called as a myogram, showing how the contraction will happen. I have already explained the latent period, contraction period and relaxation period. This is how from one single stimuli, one single contraction will happen, which results in a muscle twitch. Now, if you look at the frequency of action potential, you will see that how strong the action potential is will in turn determine how many motor neurons will be involved, and that will be equal to the muscle tension. The force generated by the muscle, that is the muscle tension, will be equal to the frequency of the action potential and the number of the motor neurons involved. This is called as the rate. That is, how much of action potential is elicited, that much tension will be produced. Now the muscle is contracting. There is one action potential. It has elicited contraction and it is still happening. When it is still happening, then even before the muscle relaxes, there is a second stimuli coming, and this one is stronger than the first one. Then both of them together will bring about contraction. Both of them will add up. The two stimuli will add up and bring about a contraction, and this is called as summation, where two stimuli are added. It is called as summation. Two action potential waves are fused, so you call it as a wave summation. So this will bring about excitation, contraction, coupling, and successive action potential will be generated. They get added up. So in summation, what happens? The second stimuli is stronger than the first one. more calcium ions will be released, and because of that the contraction will happen. The first contraction is still happening, and because of this the contraction becomes greater because of the second one. First contraction is happening, the second one is bigger than the first one, both of them will add up and it results in a bigger contraction of the motor unit. You call this as summation. Now, if the frequency of the motor neuron signaling increases, then what happens? Summation will happen and muscle tension increases and it reaches a peak point. When it reaches a peak point, then what happens? The contraction power is 3 to 4 times greater than if there was one single contraction. Because of summation, each stimuli is becoming stronger and stronger. As a result, the force generated will become more and more. And if you compare the force generated because of this added effect, you will see that if only one twitch was there, then if you compare the force generated of that to this summation, then you will see that the force generated is much more, 3 to 5 times greater than one single twitch. And here you call this one as incomplete tetanus. So what is happening during incomplete tetanus? The muscle will go through quick cycles of contraction, and between two cycles the relaxation phase will become very small. Why it is becoming very small? Because each time the stimulus coming is stronger than the first one, so the muscle is not completely relaxing. Even before it relaxes, second stimuli is coming. Even before that relaxes, third one is coming. Even before that relaxes, fourth one is coming. As a result, what is happening? All of them combined together is bringing about a twitch which is stronger, and you call this as incomplete tetanus. And then what happens? The frequency becomes so high that the relaxation phase completely disappears. There is no relaxation phase at all. Then you call that as complete tetanus. What is the difference between incomplete and complete tetanus? What is tetanus? One stimuli is there. Before that, before the relaxation happens, second one is coming, third one is coming. As a result, it all gets added up, bringing about greater force. This is called as tetanus. If the relaxation phase is incomplete, means still the relaxation is happening, then you call it as incomplete tetanus. But if the stimuli is so strong, the relaxation doesn't happen only, then the relaxation period completely disappears. Then you call it as complete tetanus. So what is happening here? The calcium ions is continuously released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum inside the sarcomere. Cross bridges are continuously forming. Then actin is getting pulled over the myosin. Muscle is contracting. It becomes uninterrupted. It goes on like this until the muscle will undergo fatigue. There is no energy for the muscle to do the action, or if there is no tension, means if the force generated by the muscle is not enough, till then the activity goes on. This is called as complete tetanus. So you can look at this graph here. In the first graph, there is summation. In the summation, first stimuli, second stimuli, third stimuli, fourth stimuli, you can see. But the relaxing period is getting shorter. It's not complete. They are all getting added up, bringing about incomplete tetanus or summation. It is bringing about summation. In the first one, it is a wave summation. What is happening in the wave summation? Excitation coupling effect is there. One motor neuron is bringing a action potential, then another one is bringing, all of them together will bring about a bigger contraction. This is wave summation. What is happening in the second one? There is no relaxation period. The relaxation period completely disappears, bringing about complete tetanus. So in this graph, you can see the twitch, complete myogram is there. That is latent period, contraction period, relaxation period, one stimuli, one contraction. That is a twitch. Then what happens? First stimuli, second one is stronger, third one is stronger, all of them together will summate, bring about wave summation. Then what happens? Incomplete tetanus. The relaxation period goes on decreasing and it becomes incomplete tetanus. Then if the stimuli is very strong, there is no relaxation period at all and the relaxation period completely disappears, the phase completely disappears, relaxation phase, and it results in complete tetanus. Now there is something called as trepe. Here you will see that first the contraction will start in a small way, then it goes on increasing and it becomes big. It looks like a staircase or a set of steps in the staircase. This kind of muscle contraction is called as trepe. So here if you see, generally whenever a skeletal muscle is dormant for a long period, it has not been put used to. Generally if people are very lethargic, they are not using every muscle. Some muscle will go untouched. They will not work that muscle. And then when you do some activity, then the muscle will have to start working. Then what happens? Action potential will be same throughout. But first it will generate little force. Then it will generate little more. Then it goes on increasing. The generation of force goes on increasing gradually, and this is called as trepe or the staircase effect. In this graph you can see how the action potential frequency or the contraction in turn, the contraction goes on increasing with time with the same tension. This is called as trepe or staircase effect. Now what do you mean by muscle tone? When we say when you're relaxing there is no contraction, it's not complete relaxation. It is not completely muscle has fallen off and it has become flaccid. It's not like that. Even when you're not doing something, small amount of contraction is produced inside the contractile protein, and this is called as muscle tone. See, for example, you're sitting here, you're holding your hand like this. That is not your regular state. Means if you just sleep, that is the complete relaxed state. If you are sitting means your hand is folded. That folding near that joint, near the knee joint, there some tension is produced to bring about the tone of the muscle so that your joint will become stable and you can sit like that maintaining the posture. So this muscle tone, it is accomplished by a very complex interaction taking place between the nervous system and the skeletal system so that it is activating some motor neurons. So first it will activate some, then it will change to some more other motor neurons so that all the muscles are not active at the same time. It will be like a cyclical one. Let us say there are about 9 muscle groups. Then first 3 are active, then next 3, then next 3, then next 3. So the activity of the muscle will be in a cyclical manner. So in this way, the muscle activity will be uniformly distributed throughout the entire bundle, and so the muscle will not undergo fatigue. That is because some motor units are active and others will be resting. When they become active, the first one will become resting. So this is how muscle tone is brought about in the body. So muscle twitch, it is an uncontrollable, involuntary, you don't want, but it is happening. It is involuntarily happening, generally in the face or the forearm or the upper arm. So generally it is a single motor nerve fiber eliciting one action potential, bringing about one contraction. And the strength of the twitch depends upon how many motor neurons are activated. If very few are activated, the twitch will be very mild. If a little more are activated, the twitch will be stronger. Now apart from this, there are also what are called as fast muscles and slow muscles. Fast muscles are also called as white muscles. They have got less mitochondria and they will appear more whitish in color, and they are generally designed to undergo anaerobic respiration. They cannot carry out aerobic respiration and they can easily become fatigue. That is, they undergo, they cannot function continuously. Fatigue will be rapid. So generally this type of muscle is designed for speed activity. Whenever you're doing sprint, means you're running very fast. At that time they will support the activity, but they will get easily tired. Whereas if you look at the red or the slow muscles, they have got more number of mitochondria. They are designed for endurance activity. That means the activity can go on for a long time. That is soleus muscle in your leg. Whenever you're walking or you're swimming, if you're used to swimming, you don't get tired. You can walk for a longer time compared to running. That is because it is supported by the red or slow skeletal muscle. What do you mean by muscle fatigue? The muscle will become tired. It will no more have the ability to contract. Then you say that the muscle is under fatigue. Now, there is something called as oxygen depth. So when you're resting, the oxygen required by the muscle is less. Then when you walk, it is moderate. When you run, it is more. When you run, then the oxygen requirement goes high. It becomes strenuous and the muscle will switch over to anaerobic respiration and it releases lactic acid. Then once you complete that kind of activity, the muscle is under oxygen depth. So even after you stop activity, the amount of oxygen required by the muscle will be more. Why it is more? Because it has to resolve the accumulation of the lactic acid. The lactic acid should get converted to glucose, for which oxygen is required. The creatine phosphate is broken down to release ATP. Creatine phosphate should be resynthesized, for which oxygen is required. So even after you stop the activity, you need more amount of oxygen to overcome all the activities which have gone out of control. I mean out of normal range. That is formation of lactic acid, depletion of ATP, depletion of creatine phosphate. All this should be replenished back. And this is called as the oxygen depth, which should be overcome, for which you take in oxygen even after your activity has stopped. So this is what you have already learnt in the first session. ATP is the main source of energy. Adenosine triphosphate. There are three phosphate groups. So whenever each phosphate is broken, energy is released and adenosine triphosphate gets converted to adenosine diphosphate and energy will be released. So when the muscle is resting, what happens? ATP is broken. Then the energy is transferred to creatine. Creatine becomes phosphocreatine and stored in the resting state. When the muscle becomes active, ATP will break, phosphocreatine will break and energy will be released. So this is how the energy supply happens during two types of exercises. In the first one, you will see it is anaerobic pathway. Anaerobic glycolysis is happening because the body is not ready to take in more oxygen when you start an activity. So at that time, anaerobically glycogen will be broken down and it will produce pyruvic acid, and pyruvic acid will be converted to lactic acid. Very less ATP will be generated, and this is a process which happens to support oxygen when the body is not having enough oxygen. But what happens when the body is doing some aerobic activity like cycling or walking? Then in aerobic pathway, glucose will be broken down and it enters the oxidative phosphorylation. Then more number of ATP will be generated. 36 ATP will be generated when aerobic respiration will happen. So with this, we completed the second session of physicochemical aspects of muscle contraction. So students, if you have got any doubts, you can get it clarified. Thank you, students.